Hello, everyone. What I want to talk about this week is the dollars and cents of it all, what we should charge for our work. This past weekend, I shot Brown's Raid at Fort Ticonderoga. Now, as a volunteer, I need to record and report my hours. And typically, I don't do a really good job of that, simply because I'm not used to it, and you have to have something that you click the button to make sure that the timer starts up, and I forget. But I shot for 2 days. I'm going to say, now this is not talking about travel time. This is not taking into consideration the fact that I was there for the 2 full days from about 9 o'clock till about 4. This is just me physically taking photographs. Of that time, I spent at least 4 hours taking photographs. At the end of the day, I ended up with 1,900 from one day and 1,600 from the other, so I had 3,500 photographs to go through. It took me 2.5 hours to cull through them. Now, when it came to retouching them, because I shoot in RAW and all of the photographs have to have adjustments made to them, I bundle that in kind of to the 2.5. It probably took me another hour in there, but the reason it goes quickly for me to go through the pictures and then double check them is because the images that I've been doing year after year, I have my style. I know what I want the image to look like. So I have my presets and things set up. I also have another program that I can run them through that I had to train. Now, why am I talking about all this? Think about this if you were working a job, right? Let's say you're a mechanic. A mechanic charges an hourly rate. So does a doctor. Now, a mechanic may give you a quote for free, right? Like with us dealing with a client. And what you're paying for in that hourly rate is their time and expertise, but also their equipment, right? They have to run the garage. They have to get the tools. They have to have the tools. They have to know which tools to use. All of that expertise gets bundled into that hourly rate. And if you look at a garage, they're back to back to back usually. 2-3 cars in there at a time sometimes, and just running all day long at that same hourly rate. Whereas we as photographers, we're out shooting, but there's this huge amount of material behind the scenes that nobody sees, culling the photographs, getting them edited. If we're going to put them together as an album for a client or set them up framed for a client, there's that entire set of making them look good in a frame, showing them framed, showing them, for example, in album on pages after pages, and going through with the client to figure out which of the photos that we culled them down to they want to keep. In this case, of the 3,500 photographs, there were 250 that I liked. And that's because when I shoot at different angles and I shoot multiple photographs. And then I pick which one of the angles or which one of the series that I just shot. I usually shoot in bursts of 5 that I like. So going through all those photographs, I kept most of them. If you were to cut them down to, divide by 5. But it took time to do that. Now, if I were working a job, if I were working at McDonald's, I'd have an hourly rate, right? If you go to a garage, the garage has an hourly rate. Go to a body shop, it has an hourly rate. You go to your doctor, there's an hourly rate in there for talking to your doctor. So you have to factor that into what your offering is. Now, if you're just going to shoot let the camera figure out what's the best way for the photograph to look, and then just give digitals away on a USB without culling them or anything. That's one thing, right? It's still your time. If you spent an hour with that client, it's your time. In theory, if I were charging a client, I would factor in my travel time, right? This is time that I can't be doing something else. I would factor in my time talking to them. Now, while that initial consult might be free, that doesn't mean I'm not going to factor that into my package cost later on. And that's just to account for my time. If I were working an hourly job, for example, someplace like a McDonald's, right? You get an hourly rate. Your time there is your hourly rate. If you were to leave that, you wouldn't get paid for that rate, right? If you're going to be away. Same applies here, kind of in the reverse. Every hour that you put into your client is something you need to account for. So, taking the example that I have here of over 6.5 hours of my time, what is my time worth? Now, this does not include, because it doesn't apply in this case, sitting down with the client, going through the photographs, designing an album. In the case of my volunteer work, the photographs become digital and they go onto a website. But if I were charging, I'd have to factor in the website, right? I would factor in the cost of the tools that I used to capture the photographs. I would factor in the cost of the tools I used to edit the photographs, or maybe I use something to cull them. Personally, I do the culling by hand, but I do use a program called Imagen, which required 3,000 photographs of mine to train that model to retouch them. I don't use it quite as much as I did when I started, because once I got my style down and I could recognize my style from the photographs that Imagen was generating back to me, right? I kind of used that to figure out what is it I really usually do. I could set it down into a preset, and that gets me 80% of the way there. But all of that time needs to be factored at what you consider to be a valuable hourly rate. Now, as I said, if you're just going to cookie cutter it, right? To me, the assembly line photographs. You get the person in front of you, you take the photograph, you let the camera do all the work, and you give them a digital, and you just do it over and over and over again. And you want to get an hourly rate of, let's say, $50 an hour, because you have your expertise of capturing the photographs and the cost of your equipment, and maybe cost of a USB drive, or however you're providing it to the client. Then if you charged $200 for a quick photograph session, might be valuable. But if you were doing something like a wedding, and that's why I wanted to get these hours up from the big event, if you consider yourself that you want to do wedding photography, and you might look at wedding photographers and be unclear as to why they charge what they do, this is why. Right? You're at a wedding. You're going to want to take a lot of shots. The reason I do things in bursts is sometimes somebody will blink and I'll catch them without blinking in that stream of shots. My stuff isn't posed, and if you think about a wedding, a lot of the photographs of the guests are not going to be posed. You're going to have your bride and groom posed a couple of times, but when they're doing the wedding ceremony, you're not going to stop the ceremony and go up to them, could you move a little bit to the right? Could you do this? You might have done that in rehearsal, perhaps, but you're not going to be interrupting the flow of the ceremony. You've got to catch it live. You've got to catch the guests live. So in a way, the event that I shot is similar to that. You're going to have that same set of making your photographs look good, but there might be more retouching that you have to do in the wedding photography. But if you shoot a wedding, right, you factor in something for your travel. Maybe you just do it as 30 cents a mile or whatever it is. The time you take to shoot, it's usually a couple of hours for a wedding. Then the time it takes you to go through each of those photographs, cull them, pick the best of the best, retouch the ones that you want to show the client, which is going to be hours. For me, when I do a serious retouch of a photograph, so I wouldn't be doing the guests and things like that necessarily, but the bridesmaid, the bride, the groom, the groomsman, I might go through and do a little retouching on those. I can take up to 15 minutes plus on a full retouch. So I have to factor that time in as well. But you go through and you've retouched all these photographs, gotten them ready to go. Now it's time you have to sit down with the client and walk through them. Again, doing that is time away from doing other things. So you have to factor that time into your cost structure. Once you're done with that, then it's taking those photographs and then sending them out to be made into framed art or into an album. If you're doing boudoir photography, you're going to be doing albums all the time. So you've got to use the tools available to lay out the album, send the album out to be made, wait for it to come back, proof the album, and then provide it to the client. All of that is time. Time away from you taking photographs, culling images, or working on your next project. So you have to take the time to record that and know what it's actually taking you for a project from beginning to end. Now, after you've done that a few times, unlike me where I have to report my hours, my volunteer hours, you'll have a feel for what a project's going to be, and you can lay out your pricing in a structured and very fixed way. And what I mean by saying fixed way is your pricing will be specific to that event. So you won't be sitting down with a person talking about a wedding and then possibly changing your pricing for that wedding. You'll be able to come up with a fixed cost because this is on average the amount of time that it takes, what I need to make to pay for the prints, the framing, the albums, whatever it is that I'm going to be providing, mixed in with my time so that I have that entire package. Also include the fact that you had to have your equipment, right? You had to buy your equipment or you had to rent equipment. That has to be factored in. Any tools that you use, that all has to be factored in. In a lot of cases, it's going to be a fixed cost. Like the Adobe packages, you've got a subscription fee that you pay monthly. When it comes down to something like Imagen, you're paying pretty much by the image. You have to factor in your insurance, right? And you have to have insurance. If something happens at an event like a wedding, you need to have coverage just in case. All of those things have to be factored in. Now, it's very easy to factor in insurance or tool costs, things that we have a fixed amount to. So if you're using Adobe, you got the whole package, let's say, it's about $65 a month. You've got a $65 a month cost over 12 to factor into for what you want to get back out of your photography for the year. If you've got insurance, it's a fixed cost. You know what that amount's going to be every year. If you've got a membership like PPA, you know what that cost is going to be every year. So those are the costs that you can spread out across all of your clients. You'll have a feel for what it costs you to put an album together and what the album's going to cost. And those companies are very good at telling you, basically, here's the minimum number of pages and how many pages after what it's going to be each page. You're going to know what it costs to get things framed. You're going to know what it costs to for the different frames that you offer around your artwork. Personally, I like canvas photographs and metal prints. The canvas has a nice rich texture to it, and the metal prints look very modern and they're very glossy. So you'll have a feeling for what it's going to cost. But up front, you're going to have to record your time so that you know exactly what it is. I know sometimes I can get going on culling photographs and going through them and completely lose track of time. For example, when I was doing Brown's Raid, I was an hour and a half in and didn't realize it. If I hadn't started the clock going, I wouldn't have realized how long I'd been working on that. And that's why it's good to have some timekeeping method external to yourself, right? Not okay, well, I started at 12 o'clock and now I'll look at the time when I get done, because you're going to forget. But something that's in front of you that you can just click, start up, and let it just count up as you're working on things. But all of that needs to be accounted for in what you charge, because nobody else is going to come along and give you money. If this is your job, if this is your business, if this is how you are making a living, the only person who's going to make sure that you get what you deserve and what you earn is you. There's not going to be somebody else out there who's going to come along and say, hey, I love the work that you did on these photographs, but you charged me too little. I'm going to give you more money. It's not going to happen. And a lot of times, photographers are seen as being expensive to begin with. And I get that. But again, let's realize the fact that we have expertise, either through years of experience and or training that we've had. We've had to learn this trade. We've had to learn how to cull photographs. We've had to learn how to edit photographs. We've had to learn how to compose photographs. We had to learn how to capture the photographs. We had to learn what equipment works best for us. And we had to come up with our own style. Years worth of work has gone into what we're doing today. And in order for us to get properly compensated for that, that's our job. We have to figure out what it is that we need to charge in order to provide this service and to make a living. We're going to have to replace our equipment at some point. We're going to have to send it in for repair. We're going to have to buy new lenses when new lenses come out that will help us capture those events better. For example, I've got a 24-70 that has become pretty much my primary lens. It's an f2.8. It's great for me capturing portraits and capturing certain events at the fort. But when I was doing this event, I knew I was going to be further away from the action than I was really going to want to be. and there's a crowd around that I have to shoot around. In order to do that, I went with a 70 to 200 2.8. And that got me most of the way there. I wanted to capture an individual, and that got me most of the way there. But next year, perhaps, I'll be using a 100 to 300, I think it is, 2.8. It's a $10,000 lens. That's not something I can afford to purchase, but it is something I can afford to rent. And that's another thing to keep in mind. If you need to rent equipment, after a certain point, it's probably going to be more costly to rent the equipment than it is to purchase the equipment, depending on how much you use it. For example, I like to use landscapes, especially when it becomes fall foliage season here in the Northeast. I picked up a small 100 to 300. It's a variable F lens, so that means that I won't be getting portraiture done with it. But that's not what I wanted it for. I wanted it to zoom people in, or to zoom in the landscapes of the mountains around me so I could get a closer up picture to it. So I could get away with that. And it was a $600 lens, so not a great amount of money that has to go out for something like that. But again, something we have to keep in mind, something we have to do going forward. In order to make a living, we actually have to do the business side of it as well. And that's what I got for you guys this week, and I'll talk to you all next week.